All right, party people, coming back. Here's a follow-up to the stapling acknowledgments and jurats to documents. Some one of the subscribers, I don't know, well, a person, I don't know if they're a subscriber or not, basically said, because I put in there, I personally add a comment asking about whether or not this was just for general notary work or for loan documents. Personally, I've never heard of it in either way. I've never been told that you need to staple anything to anything. And because I said I personally don't do it, they said, okay, well, it sounds conflicting because I say that you always need to check with the NNA, ... And I reply back that because I've personally, out of 4 years, have never been told that, I tend to go with that. I've never been told that we need to staple anything to anything. So I said, you know what? Let me look a little bit deeper. And come to find out that the NNA does tell people they have a book. Let me show you what the book is. And this isn't none of those I got you things, y'all, because I know people like to try to trip me up and like, oh, I got Griff now. No, this isn't that. So this is called the answer book from the NNA. All right, who is that? Nope, that's some work coming in. All right. That's the the NNA answer book. So I just went in there and looked for the word staple. Here they say staple. Now keep in mind, and I called the NNA also. The NNA told me this. Primarily, they're in California, and because California requires it to be adhered to somehow, hence stapling. Therefore, they recommend that you staple. And she said this, but no other state law requires it. So even though I said personally, it's not required by my state and 49 other states based off of the NNA. Now, she did say that they highly recommend it, and she said it's not mandatory, but they highly recommend, and the NNA will highly recommend that you do certain things, even though it may not necessarily be in accordance with state law. Case in point, California requires fingerprints. She said the other states don't, but they highly recommend that you do a fingerprint. So now, are you going to do the fingerprint because they said they highly recommend it, or because your state law, or you're going to go by what your state law says, which in Virginia, state law doesn't require it. So this is where it really boils down to. And again, do your research. Now, my research was based off of, I had never been told that. I've heard people saying that, but I've never been told that. I've never seen anything. And even when I looked into my state handbook, I looked up the word attach, and it was just talking about a seal and the seal attached. The attached seal must be capable of independent verification. And then this is talking about the seal is attached logically, associated with the document. This is electronic seal. So I even put in staple and this is the Virginia handbook, the word staple, because the individual asked about, said, well, what does, like your handbook may say. My handbook doesn't say staple anything. Now the NNA says, and as I've always said, and everybody knows this, I've always said, your state law first, then you hear what the NNA says. So state law says you don't need it. NNA says they highly recommend it. Two different things, okay? Now, there are a lot of people who they go off of highly recommended. Well, the NNA or whoever said they highly recommend it. So now I'm going to do it as if it's state law. And it may not necessarily be state law. So you need to find out whether or not what you're saying that you should do is state law. And you may need to ask the NNA when you call in, Is this state law or is this highly recommended and suggested? And from what the lady told me is that when people call in asking those questions about attaching documents, they tell them it is not state law. So what that also informs me is that if the people who are asking the question are talking about it in Facebook groups and all of that, if they're actually calling into the NNA and the NNA is telling them that it is not a state requirement for your state, but they just highly recommend it, and then they're going back and saying, oh yeah, the NNA said you need to staple it. That's misinformation. Okay. You're not giving out the information correctly. Okay. If you're going to share the information, share it properly. Now, I share my information based off of my personal experience. I had never been told that. Never even called the NNA to ask them about that until now, because I never saw a purpose in it. And I even asked the lady, I said, well, what about the fact that you have at the bottom of the document, you have at the bottom of the document, the fact that you can put in that information. And she said, well, sometimes notaries don't use their documents. That's what she said. They don't use our documents, or excuse me, or they just don't fill it out. So the concept is this. Got that cold air blowing, getting in my throat. This is basically what she shared with me, and I understand it completely. That, let's see, and I don't have my stapler down here, but basically what she is saying is that this document is stapled together, and if for some reason the APA gets ripped away, that you could probably match up the edges and say, oh, okay, this APA goes with that if it got ripped apart. I hear that. I get what they're saying, but I just don't think that's a good way of doing it, because if you have a loan packet and it has 20, 30 different APAs in there, or 15 that you've added, or 7, it could be, you just never know. Or any document, going by the ripping of a document, to me, isn't solid. Okay. Isn't a good way to say this all-purpose acknowledgement or jurat should go with this document because the edges are frayed just the same. I feel that you need to ensure that the stuff on here is filled out. And I even asked, I said, well, can't you handwrite it in? So if you use a document that doesn't have this, can't you handwrite it in? And she said, yeah, you could. So you could handwrite the information down here at the bottom in there. Now, again, if you just feel better at stapling it, I still suggest that you contact the people who you're doing the signing for, or or even the general notary work. Do you want this staple? Or I would say you staple. I mean, it's up to you. But the thing is this, to me, this isn't something that should be, it shouldn't be that big of a deal if you're using the right all-purpose acknowledgement and jurat that actually says it, that what the document is. But again, as I said in the first video, ask the people who you're dealing with. Now, she did also say that, yeah, with the loan documents, they typically don't want it stapled. So you got to do the asking of the question, do you want me to do this? If they say yes, do it, then you do it. Okay, cool. But if they don't, then you got to find a way to make sure that that all-purpose acknowledgement does not get randomly used by somebody on another document, and filling in this optional area provides that protection. It's that simple. And you say, well, they could just cut that off. If they cut it off, it's going to look odd. It's going to look weird. No different than if you put something on there and you don't. I'd rather fill this in. And even if I did staple it, I'm still going to fill this in, even if I hand write it in, on a document, on an all-purpose that doesn't have it. So the bottom line is this: there's no state law per the NNA outside of California that requires us to staple anything to anything. Feel free to give them a call and ask. They highly recommend it, but highly recommend doesn't mean you have to do it. Okay? Highly recommend doesn't mean you have to do it. And as I've always said on this channel, a lot of times the information being put out there, just like even for me, can be based on that person's experience. I tend to tell people, yeah, this is what I'm doing and this is what I'm basing it on. Okay. Now, when y'all called in the NNA, they may not have directly said, like I asked the lady, and I was more direct with my questioning, more focused with it, not direct, like fussing at somebody, but more direct with it or specific. And she said, well, based off of California, ... And then I was like, okay, I understand completely. So sometimes the way you ask the question, people will just answer what you ask. So you got to sometimes ask the question specifically. And one of the things that you really do have to ask is this required by my state law? And if they say yes, cool. Direct me to where it is so I can see it for myself also. But highly recommend it. And then you hopping into Facebook groups and everywhere else saying, yeah, the NNA said we supposed to do this and we definitely got to do this. When they say highly recommend it. And if what she's sharing with me is correct, which I believe it is, that every time somebody calls in, they actually tell us it is highly recommended. It is not state law for where you at that you need to staple anything to anything. Difference there, okay? So I hope that cleared everything up. Excuse me. My goal, what I'm planning on doing is what I've already done. Abide by my state law. My state law doesn't require it. I've never heard of it, never been told to do so. And I'm going to fill out the optional area. That's standard for me whenever I do a loan document or any document that requires an all-purpose acknowledgement or a jurat. I always fill that information out. To me, it's a good practice that you need to have to ensure the safety and integrity of the document and protect your notarial certificate. But if you choose not to, do not think that just because you staple a document to another, that means, oh, nobody will ever use my all-purpose acknowledgement for something else when you haven't identified what that all-purpose acknowledgement is supposed to be for what document. To me, you have to do that to ensure the security and protect the integrity of everything within that loan packet. Stapling does not mean anything. Somebody take a good staple of removing and then what? Okay, so hit me back with your comments. All right, talk to y'all later. Peace.